The crystalline spires of Centauri Prime pierced the violet sky like needles through silk, but Ambassador Kryxis P'tael couldn't appreciate their beauty today. Not when the supposedly primitive humans were about to arrive and throw the carefully maintained balance of the Galactic Council into chaos. Again. "Tell me," Grand Arbiter Velox Kryxis said, adjusting his ceremonial robes with 3 of his 6 hands, while the other 3 fidgeted with his datapad. "Why exactly are we entertaining these talks? The humans barely managed spaceflight 3 centuries ago, and now they demand a seat at the High Council." The Grand Arbiter's bioluminescent patches pulsed with what Kryxis recognized as amusement. "You sound nervous, old friend." "Nervous? Hey, these humans, they're like what's that Earth creature? Ah yes, raccoons. They dig through our carefully organized systems, make a mess of everything, and somehow come out ahead. It's not natural." The massive doors of the Grand Chamber swung open with their usual theatrical flair. Kryxis had always thought the ancient mechanisms were unnecessarily dramatic, but today they seemed particularly ominous. The human delegation strode in, and Kryxis felt his secondary heart skip a beat. They looked so deceptively simple. 2 legs, 2 arms, bland-colored suits, and those eerily smooth faces. Leading them was Ambassador Amanda Rodriguez, her dark hair streaked with silver, face bearing what humans called a poker expression. Kryxis had spent 3 sleepless cycles researching that term and still didn't understand it. Behind her walked the enigmatic Lyra Matthews, whose reputation for saying exactly nothing while somehow communicating everything had driven the Proximan delegation to request stress leave last cycle. The junior delegate, Marina Patel, brought up the rear, tapping away at a primitive-looking tablet that Kryxis knew contained more processing power than most species quantum computers. Honorable representatives of the Galactic Council Rodriguez spoke, her voice carrying effortlessly across the chamber. "We appreciate your willingness to hear Earth's petition." Trade Minister Kryxis, their tentacles writhing with barely contained agitation, leaned toward Kryxis. "Notice how they say Earth and not Terra Coalition. They're playing down their colonial holdings. Very clever." "Everything they do is clever," Kryxis muttered. "That's the problem." The human delegation took their seats at the petitioner's podium, which had been specially modified to accommodate their bizarre bipedal posture. Rodriguez placed a single data crystal on the surface before her. Just one. The absolute audacity of it made Kryxis's scales itch. Every other species brought dozens of crystals to major negotiations, loaded with legal precedents, economic projections, and cultural context documents. "We have a simple proposal," Rodriguez continued, and Kryxis noticed several council members flinching at the word simple. Nothing was ever simple with humans. "But first, we'd like to address the recent trade restrictions placed on human-controlled space." Grand Arbiter Velox's bioluminescent patches shifted to a diplomatic shade of green. The Council's decision was made in accordance with Section 47 Beta of the Galactic Trade Accords, which you signed. "Did we?" Lyra Matthews spoke for the first time, her voice carrying a note of what Kryxis had learned to recognize as feigned confusion. "Ambassador Rodriguez, do you recall signing any trade accords?" Rodriguez made a show of checking her tablet. "I'm afraid not, Ambassador Matthews. We signed the Galactic Trade Guidelines. The accords were presented as a non-binding framework for future discussion." The chamber erupted in overlapping translator signals as dozens of species tried to speak at once. Kryxis felt a headache building in all 3 of his brains. Humans and their precision with language. Of course they'd found the one loophole in 10,000 cycles of galactic law. Security Chief Rax Vaughn, their exoskeleton clicking with irritation, pulled up the relevant documents on the chamber's main display. "This is outrageous. The guidelines clearly state." Perhaps Marina Patel interrupted. "Speaking for the first time, we should review the original text? In all languages, including the 17 Earth languages we submitted it in." Kryxis watched in horror as the young human pulled up document after document, each with subtle but critical variations in translation. The chamber fell silent, except for the soft hum of environmental systems and what sounded suspiciously like Ambassador Rodriguez humming an Earth tune called "Another One Bites the Dust." This was going to be a very long day. The next 6 hours were, in Kryxis's professional diplomatic opinion, an absolute disaster. The human delegation had moved from the trade agreement semantics to resource rights and somehow managed to make the situation exponentially worse. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," Ambassador Rodriguez said, her voice carrying that dangerous tone that Kryxis had learned meant trouble. "The Council claims exclusive mining rights to all Class 4 neutron stars within 500 light-years of major trade routes. As per the Stellar Resource Management Treaty of Cycle 47392, Trade Minister Kryxis P'tael confirmed, their tentacles now tied in what Kryxis recognized as stress knots." Fascinating. Rodriguez turned to Matthews. "Didn't we categorize our harvesting operations under energy collection rather than mining when we filed the initial paperwork?" "Indeed," Matthews replied, not bothering to check any documents. "Since we're not extracting physical materials, merely collecting stellar emissions for our Dyson arrays, it falls under different regulations entirely." Kryxis felt his scales flatten against his skull as the memory of first contact flooded back. Oh, how they'd all laughed when the humans first appeared in their primitive faster-than-light ships. He remembered the patronizing reports barely managed to harness nuclear fusion, still using digital computing, no psychic abilities whatsoever. No one was laughing now. "This is unacceptable." Zorn Tai of the Trade Federation slammed all 4 of their appendages on the council table. "You can't simply redefine established cosmic engineering practices." Marina Patel cleared her throat. "Actually, according to the Encyclopedia Galactica, which the Council itself maintains, the definition of mining explicitly requires the extraction of solid or liquid materials. Energy collection has its own classification. Page 2947, subsection 12, paragraph 4. The Chamber's automated systems projected the relevant text, and Kryxis watched his fellow council members deflate like punctured pressure suits. He remembered how the humans had spent their first decade in the galactic community doing nothing but reading. Every law, every treaty, every trade agreement, even the fine print on food packaging. Everyone had thought they were just being thorough. Everyone had been wrong. Perhaps Grand Arbiter Velox interjected, their bioluminescence now a worried purple. "We should discuss the real issue here. The Council is concerned about the rapid expansion of human influence in traditionally regulated sectors." Oh, Rodriguez raised an eyebrow, a gesture that still unsettled most non-humans. "I wasn't aware that free market competition was a concern for the Council. Unless, of course, this is about the Proximan Trading Company's recent stock collapse." The Proximan delegates bristled, their crystalline forms refracting light in agitated patterns. Everyone knew their trading company had lost 70% of its value after humans introduced something called prime shipping to the galaxy. "The humans are destabilizing millennia of carefully balanced economic systems," one of the Proximan delegates chimed, their universal translator barely keeping up with their agitation. "By offering faster delivery times and better customer service," Patel asked innocently. "I wasn't aware efficiency was a crime." Kryxis watched as Rodriguez pulled up another document on the Chamber's display. "Speaking of efficiency, we've prepared a comprehensive analysis of current galactic trading practices. You'll notice that under current regulations, the average delivery time for basic supplies to outer rim colonies is 47 standard days. Human services average 3 days. Are you suggesting we deliberately slow down our operations to match the Council's traditional pace?" The emphasis she placed on traditional made several species' environmental bubbles fog up with embarrassment. Kryxis remembers how, just 2 cycles ago, the Council had spent 3 years debating the proper format for filing transport manifests. The humans had submitted their suggestion on day 1 and then sat back and watched the chaos unfold. "That's not the point," Zorn Tai protested. "You're disrupting established hierarchies." "Hierarchies," Matthews spoke up, her voice carrying just enough innocent curiosity to be terrifying. "I thought the Council promoted free trade and open competition? Or should we review the Charter's preamble about equal opportunities for all spacefaring species?" Security Chief Rax Vaughn's exoskeleton was now making sounds that the universal translators were marking as untranslatable expletives. The massive display showed real-time updates of market reactions to the ongoing negotiations. Every time Rodriguez spoke, another traditional trading company's stock dropped. "Maybe we should take a recess," Kryxis suggested, hoping to prevent an interstellar incident. "To review the documentation." "Of course," Rodriguez agreed pleasantly. "We've prepared additional materials for your review. Only about 40,000 pages. Standard contract length, really. As the council members filed out for the recess, Kryxis overheard Marina Patel whisper to Matthews, "Did you bring enough popcorn for the afternoon session?" Triple Butter Matthews replied with a wink, "It goes great with panic." Kryxis made a mental note to research what popcorn was, then immediately decided he probably didn't want to know. Some human mysteries were better left unsolved. When the council reconvened, Zorn Tai immediately took the floor, their massive form towering over the human delegation. "We demand a full audit of human technological capabilities. No species advances this quickly without outside help." Outside help. Rodriguez's voice carried a note of amusement that made Kryxis's scales tingle with warning. "Are you suggesting we violated the technology transfer treaties? How else did you develop quantum shielding 7 centuries ahead of projected timelines?" Zorn Tai's translator crackled with accusations. "Oh." That Marina Patel glanced up from her tablet. "We discovered that by accident while trying to perfect our coffee machines. Turns out quantum fields are great for maintaining optimal brewing temperature." The chamber fell silent. Kryxis watched in horror as several council members' environmental suits registered dangerous spikes in blood pressure. The humans had revolutionized defensive technology because of a beverage. Impossible. Trade Minister QX Tal's tentacles were now completely unknotted from stress. "Next you'll claim your faster-than-light improvements came from entertainment systems." Matthews coughed politely. "Actually, that was the video game division. Something about reducing lag in multiplayer matches." Kryxis felt his third brain trying to shut down in self-defense. He remembered the diplomatic disaster of Cycle 47401, when the Council had tried to restrict human expansion into the Orion Arm. The humans had simply reclassified their colonies as remote work locations, and cited the Galactic Labor Rights Agreement. This is exactly what happened with the Arcturus incident. Security Chief Rax Vaughn's exoskeleton was now vibrating at frequencies that made the universal translators glitch. "You claimed your antimatter production facilities were just power plants." "They are power plants," Rodriguez said with a shrug. "We just happen to be very efficient at converting excess energy into antimatter. Basic conservation of resources." Grand Arbiter V. Lox's bioluminescent patches had shifted to a color Kryxis hadn't seen in centuries. Pure white panic. "The Council cannot ignore the strategic implications of these innovations," Matthews suggested helpfully. "Improvements? Solutions to problems the Council spent millennia overthinking." The Chamber's environmental systems struggled to keep up with the collective anxiety of 200 species. Kryxis remembered how the humans had responded to the Council's last attempt at technological restrictions. They'd open-sourced half their patents for the good of the galaxy and crashed the tech sectors of 7 major civilizations overnight. "We have laws." Zorn Tai was now hovering 2 meters off their designated platform. "Regulations, procedures. All of which we followed to the letter," Rodriguez replied, pulling up another document. Article 7, Section 12 of the Innovation Registration Protocols specifically states that technological advances developed as civilian applications are exempt from strategic review. Unless you're suggesting we reclassify food preparation and entertainment as military technologies. The market indicators on the Chamber's displays were now flashing red across all sectors. The mere suggestion of reclassifying civilian technologies had sent trading algorithms into panic mode. "This is worse than the translation matrix debacle," a Centaurian delegate whispered too loudly. Everyone remembered how the humans had introduced their universal translator app, making the Council's official translation service obsolete. They'd claimed it was just to help humans order takeout from alien restaurants correctly. Patel raised her hand, looking every bit the innocent junior delegate. "Should we proceed with our presentation on our recent improvements in terraforming technology? The ones we developed while building theme parks." "Theme parks?" Kryxis felt his scales beginning to molt from stress. "Yes," Matthews confirmed cheerfully. "Apparently creating perfect environmental conditions for roller coasters led to some interesting breakthroughs in planetary engineering." The Chamber's security systems registered 17 species requiring immediate medical attention. Kryxis watched as Grand Arbiter V. Lox's bioluminescence cycled through colors previously thought impossible for their species. Perhaps, Rodriguez suggested, we should move on to discussing our proposal for standardizing galactic shipping routes. Unless anyone wants to hear about how our pizza delivery optimization algorithm revolutionized 4-dimensional space-time calculations. The collective groan from the council members was all the answers she needed. Grand Arbiter Velox raised all four hands for silence, their bioluminescence now cycling through emergency patterns. Perhaps we should address the primary petition? The humans have requested full council membership, after all. Ambassador Rodriguez nodded, but it was Ambassador Matthews who stood up. The chamber grew unnaturally quiet. Matthews hadn't spoken more than 20 words in the last 3 hours, and everyone had learned that her silence was usually followed by something catastrophic. Before we present our membership petition, Matthews said, her voice carried perfectly without any amplification, we should correct some misconceptions about human space. The main display shifted, showing a map of human-controlled territory. Kryxis felt his 3 hearts stop simultaneously. The map was wrong. It had to be wrong. As you can see, Matthews continued, these are not our colonial holdings, but merely our public trading routes. The actual extent of human space is considerably larger. The map zoomed out, then out again, and again. That's impossible, Zorn Tai's translator crackled. Those sectors aren't even explored. Oh, we explored them, Patel chimed in, still tapping on her tablet. We just filed the surveys under recreational activities, you know, space tourism, extreme sports, that sort of thing. Security Chief Rax Vaughn's exoskeleton made a sound like shattering glass. You're claiming exploration for entertainment. Have you never heard of road trips? Rodriguez asked with perfectly feigned surprise. The map continued updating, showing human presence in sectors that the Council had deemed impossible to navigate, sectors that had been marked as restricted due to astronomical phenomena, sectors that supposedly didn't even exist. Our petition for Council membership, Matthews continued, is actually a courtesy. We already control approximately 40% of all galactic trade routes. Unofficially, of course. Unofficially, Trade Minister Kryxis P'tael's tentacles had tied themselves into quantum knots. Well, yes, Matthews gestured to her tablet. Most of our trading ships are registered as private pleasure craft. Did you know there's no regulation against conducting business from a yacht? Fascinating oversight. Kryxis watched in horror as the display showed thousands of human vessels, all perfectly legal under council law, all operating in a massive network that somehow everyone had missed. They hadn't built an empire. They'd created a shadow economy right under the council's collective noses. This is unacceptable. Velox's patches were now strobing in distress. The council demands. The council, Rodriguez interrupted softly, might want to consider its position carefully, particularly given that 60% of all medical supplies in council space are manufactured by human hobby pharmaceutical labs. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of several environmental suits registering critical stress levels. Did she just, Kryxis whispered to no one in particular, did she just threaten the entire council with a supply chain crisis? Matthews smiled that terrible human smile. Not at all. We're simply pointing out that sudden regulatory changes might have unfortunate implications for galactic stability. Marina Patel looked up from her tablet. Oh, and we should probably mention that most of the Council's communication networks run on human-designed protocols. You know, the ones we develop for our social media platforms. The Chamber's emergency medical systems were now working overtime. 3 species had entered voluntary hibernation. A Proximan delegate had crystallized entirely. So Rodriguez said pleasantly about that council membership. We're happy to formalize our relationship with the council, but we should be clear about the actual power dynamics at play. The display shifted again, showing economic projections that made several economic advisors faint. The humans hadn't just built a parallel economy, they'd made the entire council dependent on it without anyone noticing. Ambassador Rodriguez stood up, straightening her jacket with deliberate slowness. Given the council's reluctance to acknowledge reality, we're withdrawing our petition for membership. The Chamber's environmental system screeched as they tried to compensate for the sudden spike in collective panic. Trading algorithms across the galaxy began emergency shutdowns. You can't just leave. Zorn Tai's translator was practically screaming. The economic implications are already in motion. Matthews completed, closing her tablet with a soft click. Our trading fleet received automated instructions the moment we entered this chamber. They're currently redirecting to human-controlled routes exclusively. The main display erupted with emergency alerts. Shipping companies were reporting massive disruptions. Supply chains were collapsing in real time. The Council's carefully maintained economic web was unraveling in seconds. The Proximan Mining Corporation stock just dropped 90%, Patel announced, as if commenting on the weather. Oh, and the Centaurian Trade Alliance is declaring bankruptcy. That was faster than expected. Security Chief Rax Vaughn activated emergency protocols, and warning sirens blared through the chamber. Military vessels are being mobilized in sectors 7 through 19. About that, Rodriguez said, examining her nails, you might want to check where your ships fuel up. Turns out 80% of military-grade antimatter refineries are human-owned shell companies, registered as novelty suppliers, if you're curious about the paperwork. Kryxis watched in horror as the military response collapsed before it began. Ships across Council space were reporting critical fuel shortages. Entire defense fleets were stranded in dock. This is hostile action. Grand Arbiter V. Lox's bioluminescence had turned ultraviolet with rage. The Council will not stand for. Stan Matthews interrupted. You can barely keep your economy from imploding. By our calculations, you have approximately 6 hours before the banking system fails completely. Unless. She left the sentence hanging. The entire chamber held its breath. Unless what Trade Minister Kryxis P'tael asked, their tentacles now completely immobilized from stress. Unless the Council agrees to reorganize as a true democratic body, Rodriguez stated. No more species hierarchies, no more economic nobility, no more technological hoarding. The display showed markets continuing to crash. 3 major trading houses had already collapsed. The Galactic Exchange was suspending operations. You're destroying centuries of stability, someone shouted. No, Patel corrected, standing to join her seniors. We're breaking a system of institutionalized inequality. The collapse was inevitable. We just chose the timing. Marina retrieved their single data crystal from the podium. The same crystal they'd placed at the start of negotiations. The crystal that had contained not a petition, but a countdown. The Council has 2 hours to decide, Rodriguez announced. Reform or collapse. We'll be having coffee in our ship. I hear the quantum stabilizers make an excellent espresso. As the human delegation walked out, Matthews paused at the door. Oh, and don't bother trying to trace our communications. Your entire network runs on human protocols, remember. We've already locked out all administrative access. The chamber doors closed behind them with a thunderous boom. On the display, economic indicators continued their death spiral. Military vessels drifted powerless in space. Trading ships reversed course en masse, following predetermined routes to human space. And in the ensuing chaos, Kryxis noticed something that made his scales turn pale. Ambassador Matthews had been smiling the entire time. Kryxis stood in the ruins of what had once been the most powerful chamber in the galaxy. The emergency lights cast strange shadows on the empty seats. Only 2 hours had passed since the humans left, but the galaxy would never be the same. The Council votes to accept the human terms, Grand Arbiter V. Lox announced, their bioluminescence dim with defeat. Unanimously. The words echoed in the nearly empty chamber. Most species representatives had rushed to their homeworlds to handle the crisis. The few who remained looked shell-shocked, their various physiologies showing signs of extreme stress. Do you know what bothers me most? Kryxis asked the room at large. They planned this from the beginning, from the very first contact. Trade Minister Kryxis P'tael, who hadn't managed to unknot their tentacles, gurgled in agreement. 3 centuries of filing paperwork in exactly the right way, building companies with exactly the right registrations, creating dependencies so subtle we never noticed them forming. The main display still showed the aftermath of their brief exodus. Markets were stabilizing now that human ships had resumed their routes, but the message was clear: the galaxy ran on human infrastructure, whether they liked it or not. They never wanted a war, Security Chief Rax Vaughn said, their exoskeleton clicking thoughtfully. They wanted a revolution, and we handed them every tool they needed. Kryxis pulled up the humans' original first contact documentation. There it was, hidden in plain sight, their long-term goals outlined in carefully worded diplomatic pleasantries. They'd told the Council exactly what they planned to do, knowing no one would read the footnotes carefully enough. A junior clerk just found something interesting, V. Lox announced, their patches flickering with exhausted amusement. The humans filed their Council membership petition 289 years ago. This entire negotiation was just theater. The legal groundwork was already complete. Kryxis laughed until his scales hurt. Of course they had. The humans had turned malicious compliance into an art form, using the Council's own Byzantine bureaucracy as a weapon against it. A message flashed across the chamber's screens. The human delegation was returning. Not to negotiate, but to oversee the implementation of reforms they'd spent centuries preparing for. You know what the worst part is, Kryxis said as the chamber doors began to open. They're probably going to fix everything wrong with the Council, make everyone's lives better, and act like they were helping us the entire time. Ambassador Rodriguez entered first, carrying cups of what had to be coffee. Anyone interested in discussing the future of galactic democracy? I brought refreshments. And despite everything, Kryxis found himself accepting a cup. After all, the humans had won without firing a shot, reformed the galaxy through paperwork, and somehow made everyone thank them for it. Maybe the coffee was just that good.